Happy Friday and welcome to CactusCon 10. I'm so pumped for the opportunity to share about the threat hunting topic. This discussion today is going to be designed for security practitioners looking to get into threat hunting and for organizations looking to start or learn more about a threat hunting program. While threat hunting can provide unique value to a security operation, getting started can be daunting, measuring progress can be difficult, and communicating business value could be a significant challenge. That being said, I'm hoping to share a few things that I've learned on my own journey in threat hunting, and hopefully I can help those interested in the topic get started in the discipline and help organizations mature, measure, and provide real business value with threat hunting operation.
My friends, welcome, and let's get right into it. So I wanted to provide something that everyone would be able to benefit from today. So whether you're new to the concept of threat hunting or you're a seasoned veteran, I wanted to provide a presentation that you might be able to take something away from. So whether that's a new mindset, a new value to prioritize your current threat hunts, a new understanding of why we would threat hunt, or concepts to threat hunt for and reference hunts themselves to perform in your own environments. I wanted to be able to provide these resources. So I hope you guys enjoy and get value out of this. I'm going to cover hopefully a helpful understanding of what threat hunting is for sure, what its role is in a security operations, why you might want to perform threat hunting, and finally how to mature threat hunting operations in your organization. But first, the obligatory boring stuff about me. The main takeaway here is I've had many opportunities to grow in threat hunting and threat intel, and many of them are just by virtue of being a part of the threat intel, threat research communities voluntarily. The experience I gain from each organization, it directly helps me feedback value to the others. In my primary day job at Grand Canyon Education, that's where I practice most of my threat hunting. I'm also tasked with other detection and response engineering projects there as well, but on the operations side, it's primary threat hunting and incident response. In ACTRA, I also have the opportunity to give threat intel that fuels threat hunts. For those who don't know, ACTRA, or Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance, is an alliance of member organizations that share anonymously intelligence tips with each other. So this is a great resource for new and emerging threats, and we focus on threats that our security vendors aren't already covering very well, so it's always actionable information. So that's a great resource for me. And then within the Cyber Resiliency Institute and the Sports ISAL, I benefit mostly from the threat research activities that I do there. I've had opportunities to do things like serving with the COF team for the Olympics, and we'll be able to do those again. And again, just learning from the community at large. And there's a whole community of threat researchers out there. You can learn hunts and identify techniques to hunt for in your environment and get good information about it from Reddit. There's people like me who try to throw up GitHubs from others. There's blogs on LinkedIn. There's tons of resources there that really make it accessible. And my hope is that after going through this presentation, it'll seem very accessible, very achievable. And so I just wanted to talk about this community because I am where I am today because of the communities in cyber and because of my coworkers. And there's community resources from threat hunting. Typically, either someone has a product or service that they want to sell you, or someone's discovered something or created something that's valuable to them, and they took a bit of extra time to format it and package it up and make it accessible to the community. And this is what I like to do. That's why I'm here today. And I know a lot of you are also contributors to the community. So I'm excited to get more people involved in threat hunting. It's definitely an operation that's empowered by the community. And I think, it takes a team to really tackle these advanced threats, and you don't have to work at the same organization to be on the same team. So I've enjoyed writing a few blogs on unique or interesting threats that I find interesting, at least. I do share most of my resources on GitHub just because it's a resource that others can improve and contribute to very easily. and it's a resource that I'm already familiar and comfortable with using, or a platform that I'm familiar with. And I'm really excited also about my ISC Squared magazine articles that I've been a part of, namely All Aboard for Fundamentals I got to contribute to, and coming soon I had the awesome experience of co-authoring a Home on the Range article. And what I'm really excited for, I believe home labbing is near essential to learning cybersecurity, at least perhaps in the beginning. I got a huge amount of value out of it. That's also a huge part of where I am now and how I came to know what I know, but really more importantly, it's where I was able to develop the skills, the modest skills perhaps, but the skills that I have that gave me the job opportunities I enjoy. And I still continue to train and learn from my home lab, even though I feel blessed with being able to access, tons of resources from the community and from those other orgs I'm a part of, from my own organization. I still really benefit from exercises that I do in my home lab. But my biggest claim to fame is I can exit Vim without Googling. So back to the good stuff. Threat hunting. We have a lot of poorly used words, I feel like, in cybersecurity, or at least vaguely used. Hacking, breach, threat hunting, purple teaming. I think these words can mean different things to different people. Like breach, for example. How many times have you heard someone say, assume you are breached? So, all right, like as a CISO who's told to assume he's breached, does he draft a disclosure now or later? Maybe there's better words. Maybe compromise is a better word. Maybe, assume adversaries are in your network, stuff like that. Because that's a term, that's a concept that I'll use later to discuss the threat hunter mindset. But, that shows hopefully that some issues are just that of semantics. I believe with the term threat hunting and with some of these other terms that there are helpful and maybe some perhaps unhelpful definitions, understanding of these words. We all kind of joke about sometimes how things can get kind of glamorized in marketing, and so sometimes things can lose their meaning. So on one end of the spectrum, there's precise process, and you have actual threat hunts, and you have step-by-steps process, and you have queries and all that good stuff, and you have managed threat hunting services that have their own sets of queries and their own things that they review and analyze to try and identify threats for you. And on the other end, there's this more conceptual way of thinking about threat hunting. It's a mindset, and I think both are helpful. But if your SOC manager or IT security manager or team lead or whatever says, hey, we're getting intel about X, or we just saw Y in our network and I want you to do some threat hunting. Okay, well, what does that mean? Is that a product that you implement? Is that a product you buy? Is that just log review? Is that just looking at untriaged alerts that didn't make it to the thresholds of the volume of alerts that your SOC is managing? Is it ingesting threat intel feeds and reviewing the real-time hits in your environment? I think there's helpful ways of understanding that. I think threat hunting could be a little bit more than that. One of the motivations for this presentation was what I thought was maybe less than helpful uses of that word in our industry, and I thought that we can get more value out of it. And I thought if we had a good, strong working definition, I think that threat hunting's actually something that can provide unique value. So it is a mindset, but we have to clarify some terms, I think, first. So this is just one definition. I'm sure I can Google other definitions that I'd like more, but I wanted to at least try and capture some of the thoughts I wanted to convey today. So maybe threat hunting is trying to take a proactive approach to detecting existing compromises, typically focused on advanced threats that have bypassed our existing security controls. There are better definitions out there, but hopefully, this is going to help set us up for the rest of our talk today. Mature threat hunting also needs to be, I would argue, value-adding, effective, measurable, scalable, and data-driven. Another motivation for this discussion was actually an anecdotal story from one of my friends who was working in a security team at an organization, a rather large organization, and an executive heard that they need to be doing threat hunting. And I think, some good concepts were conveyed, but there wasn't proper vision for what threat hunting looked like. They hired someone for the role of threat hunting, and I don't think it was beneficial for the company or the individual. There's a lot of spinning wheels. It was hard to really execute on. And so I think that having a correct, helpful understanding of threat hunting for that organization really would have maybe changed the game, really maybe would have made that a more valuable endeavor. So that's my hope today. So that's a little bit about the concept of threat hunting. Where does it fit in? We have, in my mind, a few different efforts that we're always pushing for in cybersecurity, or at least I like to categorize my work into some of these different categories: visibility, detection, protection. For sure, I think threat hunting's a detection effort. Traditionally, we're reactively responding to alerts. I actually think that SOC efforts have a higher return on investment. I don't think that large-scale threat hunting's for every organization. I think that every organization certainly could take advantage of threat hunting to some extent. But truly, if we're thinking about what we're doing, it's a little bit reactive. We're waiting for alerts to come in. And this new, perhaps, approach to detection from an analyst perspective is going to be proactive hunting. There's a huge industry that's working on evading the security controls that we're using to defend our organizations. So with that concept of reactively responding to alerts, I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, hopefully clarify. I liked to break this up into thinking about a hunter or a defender. Both are important. Again, I would actually make perhaps an unpopular claim in the threat hunting community that SOC for most orgs is going to be a higher return on investment, or a traditional SOC. These are the things that our security controls are telling us, hey, you should really pay attention to that. And instead, we're trying to go to our data that just tells us what happened and figure out what we need to pay attention to. So threat hunting is going to be proactive. You're searching for the threats, evading common detection tools you rely on. Now, while a hunter can lean on automation, and I think there's a lot of value in building out your queries, running reports and scheduling searches and reviewing summaries of your searches, and automation can really be a force multiplier for threat hunting. There's a active, proactive, an analysis of this to discover the threats instead of just being, provided with the threats that our SOC and SOC engineers and detection engineers have been able to create for us, as well as our security vendors. So while a SOC's kind of waiting for an alert, prepared to ambush any would-be invader at the various checkpoints, the hunter's seeking out the prey in the nooks and crannies of their territory. I really like to think about the evasions that come out. Again, if you spend time on Reddit, in 2021, there was a lot of evasion talk, and there were, especially for EDR, but also for C2. That's always a whack-a-mole game trying to respond to the latest evasion tactic. But I've seen a lot of threads about people discovering, hey, you can bypass this endpoint protection solution or an EDR solution, and it won't throw off a trigger there. One of the things that I've also seen a lot of LinkedIn discussion about, more so recently, is yes, it's evading the trigger of an alert, but that data about the event is still there. So we as hunters can still take advantage of that and get value out of that. So that's one of the places where to try and provide value. So that's hunter versus defender. Now hunter versus prey, and this is where I like to feel like threat hunting can turn the tables on the adversary. We're focusing on those that are trying to evade our detections and trying to prohibit them from doing that. So some questions that we're talking about and thinking about while we're getting into threat hunting. Do threats exist on your network today? All of your security alerts may be triaged, or at least all of within a certain time frame. But that's maybe not the same question, and that's why threat hunting, we're going to be looking at delivering compromise assessments. Are your systems sufficient to catch a wicked panda, a viceroy tiger, or a fancy bear? These advanced persistent threats, and these are some of which focus on evasion, but even now commodity malware, I would argue, or what I feel like is commodity malware, just with the vast volume of its and its prolificness, are certainly playing a strong game for evasion. A lot of these have particular bypasses to existing security controls. And that's something that that's something we have to consider when we're looking at our active defenses and how well they're performing against what's out there. So we can kind of play the big game hunting, the big game hunting game too. Just like it takes a skilled adversary, we could take a skilled, focused hunter to identify the persistent threats. There's all these reports that come out. We can read. I've been able to read a few since 2021 ended, and they talk about the dwell time. While that's shortening, which I think is interesting in and of itself, the dwell time of some of these attacks before the action on objective is taken is shortening. A lot of these threats can exist for months, and they could remain undetected while they're silently working on accomplishing their objectives. So let's attack the adversary. And that's a spoiler alert, because that is the framework that we're going to be focusing a lot of our efforts around. And I think that's always helpful to have a framework. And I've looked at there's other existing and helpful frameworks, but this one serves a use case that's very beneficial to how we can try and approach something that's maybe a little bit more elusive, like threat hunting. So talking more about the deliverables for traditional SOC to help flush this out. SOC traditionally is working on alert triage, security controls telling them about suspicious or noteworthy security events that are happening on the network. Analysis takes place, and a judgment value is given. A decision is made. This is a false positive. It's true positive, but we expect it, and it's okay for our environment. Or it's true positive, and escalation is needed. This is suspicious activity. Or of course, they're handing off to another SOC analyst. They need more analysis to determine. And we're primarily looking at the typical alert sources that we've been going to presentations to learn about for years. And a lot of these are good resources and good data sources for the threat hunter. I'm certainly not making the claim that we should be ignoring these, but these are also a good list of things that adversaries are trying to bypass or evade. And so we're going to be we want to rely on them a little bit less. The threat hunter, on the other hand, delivers a compromise assessment in my mind, as opposed to an alert that has been triaged. At the end of the day, you start with something you want to look for in a system or a network or part of your network or whatever the scope of your hunt's going to be. And at the end of the day, within the confines of that hunt, you're reasonably certain that the system is safe, secure, or you're reasonably certain that the system is compromised. You found positive as evidence, and it's not benign and expected from your network, and it needs to be escalated. Or, of course, uncertain, further analysis needed. In threat hunting, I tried to think of some of the things that I most likely start with. We talked about the data sources for SOC, and so some of the things that trigger hunts for hunters: queries, filters, theories, hypotheses, operational intel. I really love hunts driven by operational intel. And we'll get into that in a little bit here. Custom internal blacklists of indicators of attack or indicators of a compromise, especially applying that. In my mind, I'm thinking of historical application of that and looking against historical data. And anomalies from baselines and a whole bunch more. Machine learning inspired detections and tons of stuff like that. All right, so the obligatory cyber presentation Sun Tzu quote. Every good presentation has one. In hopes of being one of those, I made sure to include it. I actually found it really helpful for breaking up the concept of threat hunting. So we know how to tell if our SOC is a SOC. We can tell if our SOC is doing well or if a security product X is doing well. But threat hunting, I think, as we're still maturing in this as an industry and as a lot of organizations are adopting this, and I see, job applications for threat hunting, I think that that's still something that I think some orgs are still working on, some of us are still working on, and one of the reasons we're doing this talk today. So talking about this new discipline, I want to borrow from Sun Tzu's wisdom. Sun Tzu has 5 things. Quote, "There is therefore measure in terms of these 5 things. The 5 things are the way, the weather, the terrain, the leadership, the discipline." Now, taking this from the application to military strategy and war, and applying it to threat hunting. The way Sun Tzu says means including the people who have the same aim as leadership, so that they will share death, share in life without fear of danger. I know this presentation's titled The Art of Threat Hunting, but I really think more broadly, threat hunting could be a mindset, a discipline, it's just a different approach to detection. Above all, start with why and don't forget it. And this is one of the key things I'd like to communicate today. We're trying to perform something different than the SOC. We're trying to fulfill a different goal. We're not trying to duplicate SOC efforts. And this is actually, ironically, also a point where I wanted to mention that SOC experience and incident response experience and the tribal knowledge or institutional knowledge or whatever you guys call it at your org, and the experience of triaging and making judgments, decisions about if something is benign or malicious, that really lends itself to this new threat hunting approach. For example, I was talking about cybersecurity in general and how it permeates our life. In this case, we're talking about the way more specifically with threat hunting. This isn't necessarily a red team. I've seen job applications where they were looking to hire someone for a role that performed both red team and threat hunting. And while an organization, I'm sure there's probably many individuals in this call that would excel at both. A lot of the skills of day-to-day red team activity, like using Rapid7, hate instance of Cobalt Strike, setting up QBot, don't necessarily lend itself to the analysis of the logs that we're going to be talking about and looking through. However, I do love this idea of red team and blue team overlapping and the engagement between both. And I think threat hunting needs to be a part of that if that's happening at your organization, because part of what threat hunting tries to do is cover the gaps that the SOC cannot cover, whether that's due to, the nature of the security controls that we have existing, lack of security controls, or just, where we're at in the industry. I think that overlap's important, but perhaps some of the data that you're going to be familiar with doesn't necessarily overlap that. So, a blue teamer should and can benefit from red team exercises, understanding the kill chain, being able to perform some of those exercises themselves. Totally an advocate for all of that, but we're looking a lot at understanding techniques in the MITRE ATT&CK framework. For understanding forensics artifacts and those sorts of things. Understanding what logs are and where to find them. Now, the weather means the seasons. For us, I think talking about new RAS providers, when a new RAS provider that's very mature releases a Linux variant, keeping track and keeping known CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities, knowing if you can detect that in your environment, knowing about Emotet's reawakening or a new Emotet campaign theme, Patch Tuesday, 0 days, all this stuff that's really the current available knowledge and threat intelligence that we have in our industry today is included in the weather. I really like the focus of operational intelligence here, just because that's is applicable to more attacks than just tactical intelligence, and we will definitely get into the delineation between those if that's a new concept. The terrain is to be assessed in terms of distance, difficulty, ease of travel, dimension, and safety. Also, I love one of my favorite quotes that I just recalled from the first time I read The Art of War, the one that stuck out to me that I thought was just the coolest sounding. If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. Now, the adversary is coming onto your domain. So you can know, and part of this is tribal knowledge. You should know your strengths and weaknesses. You should know where your crown jewels are that you are trying to defend and what the adversaries might be going after based off of their actions that they're trying to take objective off of, knowing your OSIT footprint, knowing what actors, especially, we're often thinking about advanced persistent threats, or at least very mature and capable threat actors, knowing what they often go for. classifying devices with external services in your environment so you can identify and understand those too based off of where they're at in your network, knowing your own vulnerabilities. The goal here, I think, is to predict the path that the adversary might take. I love a project called Bloodhound, knowing your app vulnerabilities and service vulnerabilities. These are all key to understanding yourself so that you can understand what the adversary's experience might be as they try to compromise you in order to direct our threat hunting. Now, leadership is a matter of intelligence, trustworthiness, humanness, courage, and sternness. I think threat hunting certainly requires a concerted effort, and this becomes so important if you have more than one or two people. If with good leadership, the sum of the whole can become greater than the individual contributors, and that's the goal for every operation that we take on. And I think it's just much more important with threat hunting because we're trying to create our own, incidents, events to investigate out of large data sets. So unlike the SOC, where an individual alert comes in, a SOC analyst can claim it and work on it, and then maybe if they need to, they can pull people in. But there's an event that they're able to work, an alert that they're able to work. Threat hunting doesn't work like that. If you're not careful, if you have a large team of threat hunters, they may spend the vast majority of their time overlapping each other's efforts. So there's leadership involved here, and I think also that a proper vision is important for the threat hunting operation. Like I had noted before, the story of a friend whose org leadership, I think, was on the right track, wanted to get involved in threat hunting, knew that the existing security controls weren't sufficient, but didn't have proper vision for that, and ultimately it did not work out. I think the leadership also communicates business value and makes sure that results are delivered because, again, threat hunting can be cool. I love taking a new hunt, taking someone else's idea, trying to learn how I can apply it to my environment to discover new threats. But if you're just kind of perusing Reddit, throwing a few searches off of your own environment, is that search sufficient in its current state to identify the threats that you need? How are you making sure that you're actually contributing to the defense of your organization? And we'll talk about that, but I think that part of the presentation today is going to be something that needs to come from the leadership level, whether that's a titled leadership or just someone on the team who takes the baton and runs with it. That might be vary from org to org, but leadership's certainly key. The discipline means organization, chain of command, and logistics. And so this is where I I've noted multiple times SOC probably has a greater return on investment in your own organization as it is. Even with the mature threat hunting operation, it's just the SOC's handed the alerts that are trying to indicate that, hey, something that someone thought at one point was already malicious, and for organizations out there. Now we're trying to take a more of a scalable approach where we're trying to take an idea and a concept to identify a technique and applying it to our own organization and filtering out the stuff that tribal knowledge can provide. So it's much more fine-tuned and much more personalized for our organization. But it's going to be more analytics. There's going to be more analysis involved. So chain of command and logistics are really important here. You need the actual threat hunters to focus on this and not that. It's easy to duplicate efforts if you're just kind of throwing analysts at the task of threat hunting, and you don't want to chase rabbits down every hole. I really like having a notepad where I can save things that I'm interested in, but you need to actually complete your threat hunts in order to provide value. So a method to kind of record and not replicate analysis is crucial, I think, especially, from day to day. So the message here is stay on target. Prioritize, focus your hunt, bring it to completion. I'd say I think that a single completed and conclusive threat hunt's probably going to serve your organization better than a dozen of incomplete and inconclusive threat hunts, if that helps. So where does threat hunting fit in? SOC, IR, engineer, who do they work with? I think that the goal of threat hunting is to identify new investigation leads. I think that they're going to be starting with queries automation. They're going to be starting with a hypothesis, and those will be starting your environment, and then there's going to be scope reduction, log filtering, and eventually you want to get down to where you have individual events that you want to analyze and dig into, just a lot like how you would a SOC alert. I think often that's the case, at least. But I think that it kind of exists perpendicular to the SOC role. And I have a beautiful stick diagram here that I hope communicates this. Now, when I first started presenting on threat hunting, these were actually titles, and I quickly realized through actually my work with ACTRA that many sectors have different titles for things and different terms for things, and one always sounds cooler than the next. So I realized we all wear different hats. A lot of us have one title and different titles actually, but we perform similar tasks. So it's kind of a little messy, I'd say. So with that in mind, I tried to stick to functions. So there's security control that exists. It sends an alert or notable event to an analyst to triage, and that generates an investigation lead. That's brought to completion. Either it ends there, it's a false positive, or it's true, but not relevant for your security operations. Maybe it's a penetration tester, or it's a red team activity, red team automation, or maybe your red team and purple team are working together with some purple team activity. Whatever the case, that ends there, or it gets pushed on. You investigate and analyze it, and you execute a response. In the same capacity, a threat hunter is leaning on massive amounts of raw data, enriched by the intelligence available today, often realized in the forms of reports or queries against logs in your environment. They perform the threat hunting, where the SOC analyst performs the triage on alerts, and eventually an investigation lead is produced, moves on to be investigated and analyzed, and eventually a response is executed. So that is where it fits in. Now let's talk about the methodologies. I really hope this is a good place where when you start to read information about hunts that are out there, you can really start breaking it down, understanding how to apply it to your environment. So in this case, we are assuming threat actors are already in the network. This really is a role of the threat hunter. They are tasked with assuming there's threats in the network that have been missed and that have bypassed our security controls. That's why it's proactive, because we haven't been able to identify it. We're not being received an alert. So we're going to proactively look for that adversary hidden in our data. So investigations can be driven, I think, in two different ways. They can be hypothesis driven, and this is with operational intelligence. So once you identify this, the threat hunter will be looking for specific behaviors in their network, trying to identify the existence of certain techniques. Certainly helpful and awesome are hunts that can combine techniques to show you events where not only did X occur, but Y also occurred as well. It's bringing something theoretical or something that occurred in someone else's environment that we have intelligence on, and being able to identify it in your own environment while also excluding any false positives from your search or expected activity. Investigations can also be fueled by known observables, and these are the tactical types of data. If you're familiar with the different types of data, we can cover that in a moment if you're not. But these are where indicators of a compromise and indicators of attack occur, also frequently referred to as cyber observables in the industry. And these can help us identify things that missed signatures, detections in our biosecurity controls by nature of, at the time of occurring, perhaps the firewall or intrusion detection solution or endpoint agent didn't know about a specific indicator, and on top of that, the type of attack was performed was evasive by nature, and we can identify those by pulling our intelligence of today and throwing it at our data of the past. Also, certainly advanced analytics, machine learning inspired hunts can occur. User and entity behavior analytics produces a lot of data, a lot of cool data often that you can also hunt through. Exploit detections, rare log items, those sorts of concepts, baseline, network activity or user activity falls into user entity behavior analytics. But baselines and anomaly detection, I think, are also great fuels for those types of investigations where you have an individual hit. You're not just looking for a type of technique, but you have an individual hit in your network, and you're tasked now with investigating that. So I started to notice when I was actually presenting on threat hunting some similarities in the progression of a spectrum that exists in data, information, and knowledge. And when we're talking about this largest volume of data, and that exists at the bottom, whether that's the threat intelligence that we have in terms of indicators or email addresses or DNS names, records, or file hashes, that exists in large volume. And then as we move up to operational intel, knowing what the techniques are being performed, applying those to MITRE, is something that the industry is doing a lot right now, both in terms of the threat intelligence industry and the detection industry. And I'm really excited about the convergence of both of those. Or strategic knowledge, where we're looking at adversaries, objectives, and larger things right there. But in most of these cases, whether it's intelligence in our own environment or the data that exists in our environment that we're pairing our intelligence with, we go through, I think, a similar process of you start with the large amount of data and you collect it, you organize it and sort it. Eventually, you start to perform some sort of analysis on it, and that brings you up the pyramid to summarizing. Maybe you're filtering out data that's not needed, and you're reducing, making summary indexes is a popular thing amongst SIEMs and analytic platforms. Then you start to get into analyzing and making sense of that, and creating some information about the underlying data. Eventually, you want to, synthesize reports and eventually get to decision making, and we always really want to bring it to completion. Our goal is always to make a decision to take some action. And in a similar side, just with the breakups of the types of information that's involved, you might have a threat intelligence program at your organization, and that might start with threat feeds and real-time alerting, and then maybe you move up into threat hunting when you get the operational intelligence as well, and you prioritize engineering tasks based off of the intelligence that's out there, making sure that we're protecting against the techniques that are being used when possible. That can also fuel an incident response, and then maybe you're getting more advanced in the analysis and the resources that you have in terms of threat intel, and you're doing actor profiling for your organization. You're doing business risk and cybersecurity, certainly communicating business values to communicate it as a business risk. And I think threat intelligence can do that when you're looking at the threats that are facing your organization and being able to compare that to those threats as they have faced other organizations and what that meant for those other organizations. And eventually, if your organization takes it up to that level, doing threat research and contributing back to the community that allowed you and empowered you to be able to bring that to your organization, bring that value. So one simplistic way I like to think about it, after giving all that information, I hope that maybe I wanted to bring it back a little bit and say threat hunters can use the knowledge afforded by today to find threats that have made it in our past our detections and prevention security controls yesterday. Obviously, it could be longer than yesterday, but we're trying to take the knowledge that's afforded to us and apply that information to the data that exists. So this certainly does require and rely on historical data. It's not impossible to do threat hunting on a day's worth of data, but the intelligence that's out there, might not be as readily available to serve that. So I did want to talk about that as it relates to the tactical side of threat hunting and this threat intelligence, or I think the raw data. I like to talk about threat data and break that up into operational and data kind of sides of the coin. So with the operational, we're talking about tactics, techniques, adversary profiling, tools, processes, targets, objectives, etc. Those sorts of things. With the data, we're talking about our typical cyber observables, data names, ASNs, CIDRs, mutexes, emails, subjects, registry keys. You get the idea. They both are helpful. But I wanted to note, I do hear a lot of people today saying threat intel, particularly I think they were referring often to threat data feeds and threat data. These indicators are garbage. And I don't disagree with the sentiment or really what they're trying to communicate when they say that, or the frustration that they're feeling. At least I do get I do get the frustration. A lot of us have gotten to the point where we're taking massive amounts of threat data feeds and we're throwing them at our real-time detection solutions and our, looking at our net flow activity in real time and our endpoint at real time. And it's cheap. It's not computationally expensive, and there's a lot of free resources or cheap extra licenses from our vendors. So it's worth doing, I think. But a lot of people have been disappointed with the efficacy of that. I've heard someone I was learning from and who I totally respect and who's taught me a lot. I heard them say, if an IP was from last week, I don't care about it. Who cares if an indicator came out about a specific host name a month ago or last week or whatever. And again, I get that, the complaint here is that we're trying to use threat intelligence that we've discovered, maybe a week, 2 weeks, maybe a month, maybe 3 months after the attack to defend attacks in real time. And we all, we don't even talk about, we're not even focused on polymorphic malware now. Hashes are always going to be different. Now, even entire hosts are set up on VPSs or AWS or DigitalOcean. There are entire instances set up under entirely new domains for a specific attack or a specific campaign, and they're gone. And so I get that. But I think we're trying to fit, a round peg into a square hole. If you install a screw with a hammer, you're gonna have a lot of flaws and a lot of things to complain about the screw. And so I just wanted to note for the threat hunter that the time attribute is a value property of your threat data. Remember, we can take this intel from today and hunt in the past, and we can use that data to keep around for our investigations when we're hunting. They could be triggers for our own hunting. So yeah, you might not protect yourself from an emerging threat by running it against a threat data feed. You may, and this is one thing that I've learned well from our Arizona Cyber Threat Response Alliance. We try to keep the information that we share with the member organizations, that we share with each other, we try and keep it actionable. And so often that means, the data is not old because everyone in the security industry either knows about it or it's no longer applicable when we find out about it, just because the adversaries moved on. But why not throw that against an hour of data from 2 weeks ago or from a month ago? You might find that threat intel performs better when it's actually complementing the time frame that it was created in. So I hope that is a helpful concept for threat hunters who use tactical data to drive their threat hunts. Don't just look at the last 24 hours. All right, so this is a great example. I have 2 examples of my GitHubs up here, and I really, part of this presentation is, I could say requires audience participation. And so by that, what I mean is, I think really to get a comprehensive, good feel of everything, I would really love, I think after the presentation, go and look at mine or other people's threat hunts. There are tons out there. I have 2 that I provide that are relevant to our talk. But we'll provide links for those at the end. You can pause, you can copy it down, or just search my name and search the repository for this. But Sunburst is a great example of threat intelligence and a threat that real-time detection providers, they didn't know about. So we had to resort back to proactively searching for the presence of the techniques and indicators historically in our environment. And this is required for those of us who were, digging into Sunburst. And with that, we were able to kind of determine that, we didn't see the evidence, or that we were a stage 1 or stage 2, or I think the term that was used then was phase 1 or phase 2, target. But, this is a great example where we can't just rely on the detections coming into us and sitting back and taking those on. And then as we learned about the post-compromise techniques that were used and the behaviors that were exhibited, we were further empowered with the intelligence of today, as I said, to look for threats in our environment yesterday, so to speak. The Sunburst threat hunt I particularly like as an example just because it has both the tactical and operational intelligence side of it. There are indicators there. There's a whole bunch of different indicators there that you probably have already looked through for your environment and applied that to your SIEM historically and tried to look through the APIs of your endpoint data collection tools or whatever that looks like for your org. You tried to apply that, and you may have also done some operational intel. Maybe you were looking for SAML tokens that didn't have the default 1 hour time to live, or you were looking for other behaviors and techniques that were used by that adversary. So this is a resource. Again, if you would like to review that, feel free to pause or just copy it down for later use. Log4j. This is a great example of a threat that was evolving just too quickly for real-time threat detection to take care of it. Threat detection wasn't cutting it, and we needed some more manual analysis. So in this repository I have, there's 2 different hunts, but I also welcome and challenge you to go look for that and throw it against your environment. If you still have logs from, what was that, the December 10th 0500 UTC or whatever, when the scans really started to kick off, throw it against that, and these are hunts that you can try out in your environment. And I hope that Log4j one I made with the intention of, there's a lot of screenshots, it's very step-by-step, so hopefully that's very accessible to people who are just getting into this. But the real reason Log4j is really relevant here, I think, is just because, again, of that evolution of the attack so quickly. I just chose one vendor. I think that, in my opinion, this is actually a vendor who does a good job at creating signatures for their customers. But you could see they had to evolve as a threat evolved. We would create a way of detecting it. We were looking for the JNDI, LDAP, or DNS, or COBOL, or LDAP, or whatever it was, and we were looking for those strings. And then all of a sudden, they came out with lower or upper strings to resolve the complex string that was evading detection, and in some cases, for those who were using blacklist prevention. And that just kept evolving. There kept being new ways. And in this on the left side, you can see the vendor coming out with new signatures. In the middle, you could see a list that shows a bunch of the different ways of trying to bypass detection. And I tried to write regex for that you can also access in the repository. And then on the right side, you can see where we're actually trying to extract those threats and actually go through a threat hunting process and be able to conclusively comprehensively look for all the attacks, not relying on our security controls. And that was one thing that we were just looking at web logs, we were looking at NetFlow and web proxy logs, or if you have web traffic from your firewalls, we were purposely not relying on detection controls for that entire hunt for the purpose of, one, communicating a point, but 2, we couldn't because it was changing so quickly. So this resource is available, and again, I hope that's helpful to you and at least serves as an example. So who can threat hunt? Too cheesy to say anyone. I really do think that, with the guides that are out there now, I have started, when I started, I have benefited so much from resources that were out there, and I attended so many talks of people saying, hey, use this search, and they walked through some hunts. But I just felt like, while there's a ton of great resources out there, I felt like a comprehensive process wasn't out there to mature it. And I certainly think that those were good threat hunts, but I'm hoping that this is a good presentation about a threat hunting program and actually trying to operationalize it. But so I think we're talking about who's best suited for it. And so I think network SMEs, endpoint SMEs, and I just, at this point, I want to say, I think people who've been through SOC and a little bit of incident response, I think really are well suited towards this type of activity. So yet another playbook, but hopefully one that's truly valuable for those who have some threat hunters or who have a SOC with some extra time that you want to get into threat hunting. So we need a process that is repeatable, scalable, and we need to measure our progress. We need to deliver value, so that requires deliverables. And so we need to continuously focus on improvement. It needs to be a little agile just because the threats that are out there are changing so much. So I use this, and I wanted to share this with others. It's really, I try to make it as simple as possible. And there's other ways to come up with threat hunts, but in terms of measuring your growth, I liked this. Identify a MITRE attack technique. And I think that this can be prioritized for your organization. Either try to use the MITRE matrix to look at your coverage as it relates to other tools, or look at available intelligence out there about what threats exist and what's going on in the world. But you want to identify a technique, and then with that technique, you want to define your goals. Are you collecting telemetry, or do you need to do that? Can you report on it? Can you detect on it? Eventually, you want to mature to that. Then you want to execute the technique in your environment. and this might feel like purple teaming, but I really just feel like there's so many red team resources that are out there that a blue teamer, a goofy blue teamer like myself, who only does a red team in conference CTFs every once in a while, if I could do it, anyone else can do it. A lot of them are copy and paste. I'm going to get into that in a moment. But so you execute the technique somewhere in your environment so that you can collect the analytics, and so you can collect the data that is generated by that. And then you design and tune your search and profit, but you need to make sure you measure it. So really briefly, hopefully, this is something that's familiar with the industry, because I'm excited that there's so many more people talking about this and so many vendors using this. It's been a immeasurably helpful resource for me. I literally, back in the day, took the time, tried to read through it, and didn't read every technique, but if I didn't understand the technique, I clicked on it and took sometimes read the summary. That was really a good experience for me in growing my knowledge in cybersecurity. So I wanted to use MITRE ATT&CK because we can measure our capabilities maturity against an existing knowledge base that's used throughout the industry. Just as it exists, you can go there and you can attach links to the different techniques and the different sub-techniques. You can add comments. So I did that, and I would have reports and searches, and whenever it was more appropriate to have one or the other, I'd throw in a link and throw in a search, and I'd be able to comment about, how often, the number of events that were there, so I can understand how often I should look at that. If it was 30 a day, maybe that was worth looking into. If it was 300 a day, then, I needed to tune that more. That wasn't really actionable, or maybe I looked at it once a week or something like that and tried to sort through it at a higher level. But this is where I realized that this was a really helpful use case, because there were some other projects that also used MITRE. And this is where, that playbook that I gave you really is easily accessible to, I think, anyone. Because not only does MITRE serve as a model for us to measure our capabilities and our growth, but it's also standard that other resources are already mapped to, such as red team automation. And the Atomic Red Team is a phenomenal resource, and it's what I use to try and identify techniques even still. And it's growing, and you can contribute to it too, and I love that, and I think that's really cool. Now you can also, use red team automation stuff to emulate adversaries like Prelude, or get an actual red teamer in there. And I've heard of organizations challenge their threat hunting team by, making them detect a red teamer without any security alerting data, just, the actual endpoint data or network data from Zeek or something like that. And I think that's cool. That those are good exercises, and I love the idea of that. Don't stop doing that. But, I do want to make sure we are considering what our SOC already does, because threat hunting is not doing anything if the SOC's already identifying it. So, just consider your SOC's existing stuff, and I think MITRE helps do that. So, literally just from my IDE as I was working these through, it maps to red team projects that exist out there also, and you can see this is delete volume shadow copies, and it's a really simple example. I chose examples that I hope most of the audience would be familiar with, and you can see you can just copy and paste these, and that just makes it really easy to simulate this technique and behavior in an environment, so you can detect on it and see what it looks like and start to build analytics based off of that. It also, MITRE does also map to blue team discovery projects, and again, while there's many out there, you can look for a technique and throw it in Google. There's a cyber analytics repository that MITRE also maps to. And this, it tries to do as much as it can to provide this for you. At the bottom there, it shows an example of Splunk and Sysmon and what you can actually do to try and identify this exact activity in your network. So I just performed the activity in my terminal. I copy and paste and throw it in the terminal for PowerShell. And then and now I have the analytics that I need to throw in my SIEM to detect it. And of course, this is an example of Splunk, but there's many others. If you scroll down, there's others out there, and there will be different data sources, of course. So this is another example from when I was actually working on this. And there are ways to automate this if you're wanting to do that, but I like to take it piecemeal wise and kind of go step by step. But so there's LSAS memory dump with proc dump, and this is how you can make that happen in your environment. And then again, there's a resource to identifying it in your environment. And tons of searches to get you started, and with a little bit of filtering, if there's legitimate examples of this in your environment, you can create reports that you can review to try and identify abuse of that. So, and then finally, not only does it map those resources, but consider what your SOC's already doing. What are they already covering that you can't today? This is a tool from my home lab that tries to automate some of the detection of the techniques that I can already detect against. So it's not complete. It's not, your org will look very different than this. This is just, lab environment, but the idea still stands. I could see what techniques I'm not getting, and I can focus on those. And that may not be comprehensive. You may want to validate that your SOC's tools can detect that, and there may be bypasses, but this is a way of measuring what your SOC's already performing so you can try to perform a net new. Some final thoughts I'll leave you with. Threat hunting is most beneficial when it's creating value that traditional SOCs, their reliance on real-time alerting, it can't create, right? So the SOCs, because of the reliance on real-time alerting, threat hunting is trying to solve a different use case. So consider also minding the gap. Don't duplicate the SOC's efforts. Don't just be a second alert to what the SOC's already triaged. Have a way to document the current threat hunting efforts. Break up the roles and responsibilities to prevent duplication of efforts. Some people divvy up the data domains, maybe an EDR person who's an expert at that focuses on that for their shift, but you want to be able to break that up. You don't want two people to triage an alert. You don't want two people to triage the same data or the same technique. Make your hunts data driven. Leveraging the intelligence that's out there for your organization in the appropriate time frame, or at least throwing it at historical time frames, because the time frame that your threat intel is going to be least useful for is right now. It's really going to be helpful to apply it though to those later dates. And just make sure you're complementing the SOC. Some brain candy to leave you with. This has grown over my presentations, but just some final thoughts. And again, that resource up there from my GitHub, because I do think part of what I wanted to provide you guys is threat hunts that this median and the time frame that we have doesn't really lend itself to, but those resources are out there to go at your own pace and at least just read through to understand and get some real world examples. I've really enjoyed being able to share this information with you guys. I really hope this was helpful to you. If nothing else though, just talk about it with your friends. If this is all stuff that share with your team, share with other organizations, share what's been successful for you if you've done threat hunts and if you've identified threats without relying on security controls. The threat hunting intelligence is really empowered by people that are out there that share their experience. So get a part of the community, you'll benefit from it, and you'll be able to provide value to others. So enjoy the rest of CactusCon, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.